Now we're going to see how to get started with the installation for our Cypress 101 class. The first thing we want to install is Node.js. So for me, I'm using Mac OS right now, so it gives me this option for the Mac OS. I would always go with the recommended for most users option instead of the latest features. So if you are using Windows, follow the instructions accordingly, and you'll be able to download this and install this by just following the instructions. So I clicked on this and it's downloading. Okay, so that is ready. And I'm just going to follow this given. Okay, so that is done downloading. Now, how you can check for that is by actually going to your terminal, and I'm going to bring my terminal here, and then you can say node.v. So you can see that Node.js got downloaded, npm.v, and your Node package manager also got downloaded, and this is the version of that. The next thing you want to download is Visual Studio Code. This is the IDE that I'm going to be using in this tutorial, and it's easily available and works really well in both Windows and in Mac. Since I'm using Mac, I went through this process of downloading it. You may want to go through the Windows option if you're using Windows or Linux accordingly, and just follow the instructions in that, and you'll be able to complete the download of it. So for me, I've already done that, and this is what it looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and open the terminal. And what I did was I created a folder for my Cypress 101. So I'm going to be just opening that folder, and I'm going to be creating a new folder for Cypress practice. So when I do this, I'm going to go over to my Visual Studio again, and I'm going to go and navigate to my Cypress folder, and I'm going to say, I'm going to navigate to the Cypress practice folder, and then I'm going to say npm init. This will help me initialize my project and download the package.json file that's needed. So when I do this, it's going to say, it's going to give us an option to add details to personalize it. So this is going to be the same. I'm going to have the same version. Description can be Cypress 101, and then entry point can be index.json, test command, all of this can be the same. Keywords can be anything like testing, automation. It's totally optional. If you want, you can. If you don't want, you don't have to, and you can write your name for author. Yeah, so this is ready. So now that you have this, let me open up file, open. It's gonna open this. So we have our package.json over here, right? So now I'm gonna go back to the terminal. And I'm going to do npm install Cypress with the flag save dev. So this will install Cypress over here. Now, there are many different ways to install Cypress. Let me walk you through that. So if you go to the Cypress official documentation, you'll see all the different ways in which you can install Cypress. So you can install using npm, you can install using yarn, you can also do a direct download for installing Cypress. But the most recommended way is to use npm install. So before that, we need to do an npm init, which we already did, because that will create the package.json file in the root of the project to ensure that Cypress is installed in the correct directory. And then we know that Cypress is also versioned like any other dependency, right? So by using npm, it kind of simplifies running Cypress in continuous integration. That's another reason why we want to use npm when compared to the other options. You can go through this document at your leisure. It has some really good information that will be helpful while you're downloading and installing Cypress. Okay, so looks like I had already installed Cypress, but when you give this command over here, this will go through the entire process of installing Cypress. And the reason we give save dev is so that it gets downloaded and installed as a dev dependency. When it installs as a dev dependency, then if somebody from your team is downloading this or cloning this from CI, they wouldn't need to download and install Cypress again. It'll already be a dependency, so it'll already be installed. It'll also make it easier for you to push your code to CI, because then it's already installed as a dev dependency, so it doesn't have to go and download and get installed again in CI. So that process gets easier if you add this flag while you're doing your npm install Cypress. So if you see over here, you have these new dependencies added over here. So the next step I want to show you is to open the test runner. So for that, you say npx Cypress open. When you say that, Cypress is going to open up the test runner over here. So when test runner opens up, you'll see the folder structure kind of changes because it opens up with a number of examples, and Cypress like provides its own folder structure over here. So you'll see that some new folders got added and some new examples got added over here. And you have your cypress.json file added over here. So let's take a look at this test runner over here. So test runner, as I mentioned, came with a number of examples. So if you just click on one of the examples, you'll see how it opened up a browser and it's executing that test. And this is what it looks like. You'll be able to see how detailed the tests are, just to give us an example of some best practices and all of that. So you'll be able to see the test actually executing over here in the browser that opens up. And once the tests pass, it gives the results over here. If any of the tests failed, it would show it over here. This is the time it took to execute the test. You can rerun the test again by clicking this. So this is what this looks like. Now you'll be able to stop the test over here, and then you can change what browser you want to use by clicking over here. You could use Electron or Chrome or Firefox. I will show you how to configure that. But this is just an example of what the test runner kind of looks like. Now let's take a look at the folder structure over here. So if you see over here, there is a cypress.json file. This file basically is is useful for us to override any default Cypress configuration. For example, if you see over here, if you go to settings and configuration, there are some basic configurations that the test runner kind of Cypress kind of comes with. If you see, the base URL and all of that is null, and the browsers are Chrome and Electron, there's no Firefox. So these are like the basic configurations that comes with. So if we want to change any of this, if you want to override any of this, then the cypress.json file is where we will do that. And then we have the package.json file. So if you see, after we downloaded and installed Cypress, it's added as a dev dependency over here. And then we have so many different folders inside our Cypress folders, like subfolders inside the Cypress folder. So let's look at what each of them do. For example, the fixtures folder, this is basically used for any external piece of static data. So if your test data, if you need any test data for any of your test scenarios, then this is the folder where we'll be adding all of that test data as a JSON file, for example, over here. And then we have the integration folder. The integration folder is where our actual tests will be stored. Now, Cypress gave us some examples over here of some tests. So this is what an example Cypress test will look like. So Cypress has given us a clear indication of what it looks like with best practices, so many comments to, help us understand what these are. So these are good reference points to use while we actually start writing tests. So that was the integration folder. And then we have the plugins folder, which is basically for setup, and it enables all the external Cypress um, libraries, like all the third-party Cypress um, extensions and all of that will be added, and that will be maintained under the plugins folder. And then we have the support folder. In the support folder, index.json file is the one that runs before every single spec file. And then we have the command.json. We can create your own custom commands and override existing ones using these files. So all of that will be under the support folder. So these are some of the folder structures. We'll go in detail when we actually start creating our own tests and start working on this framework. But this is just an introduction and an example of how these things work. Now, the next thing I want to show you is actually how to write your own configuration, like Cypress configuration. For that, let me show you over here. So there is this, again, like whenever there is, Cypress has amazing documentation. Anytime you use a piece of software that has documentation, you should really take advantage of it. That is just what I think. For example, in Cypress over here, we can just try to see configuration. So if you go to configuration, it shows you how many different configurations you can actually use. It gives you all of the examples over here in detail. For example, base URL, environment variables, ports, browsers, timeouts. These are all things that you can override and you can change and you can add to the config file. So let me just give you an example of how to do that. Now, before that, I also want to install the application under test that we'll be using so that we can use that as a base URL for our config file. So before we actually go to change the config file, let's set up the application under test. Now for that, again, I'm going to be using the real world practices example that Cypress has provided. So if you go to Cypress's best practices documentation, they mentioned that the Cypress team maintains a real-world app, which is a full-stack example application that demonstrates best practices and scalable strategies with Cypress in practical and realistic scenarios. So we could actually use this application to practice our Cypress testing against, right? So if you go to this link, it takes you to this GitHub page where the GitHub repo. So you can easily clone this repo and you can use this So they have a good README as well that shows you exactly how to use this, and they've clearly mentioned that this is purely for demonstration and education purposes. Its setup and configuration resemble a typical real-world application, but it's not a full-fledged production system. So we can actually use this app to learn, experiment, and practice application testing with Cypress. And it's very easy to get started. Just the two commands, yarn install and yarn dev. These two commands will help get started with this. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to be going here and saying I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to go here. Um, let's go to new terminal, and then going to go back here. So over here, I'm going to say git clone, and I'm going to paste that. Okay, so now it's cloned. Now let's see. So yeah, it's downloaded it over here. It's cloned it over here. So next what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add folder to workspace in Visual Studio. So when I do that, I'm going to add this to the same workspace over here. So I have both of them open at the same time. So this is our Cypress practice and this is our Cypress real world app. Now, if I go ahead and save as over here, be able to save this as Cypress 101. Uh-oh, I made a mistake. Edit, undo. I want to save the workspace over here, right? So file, save workspace as, and I'm going to save the workspace as Cypress 101. Okay, so now we have that saved. So we have our Cypress practice and we have our Cypress real world app. Now I don't know what I changed over here. Yeah, this doesn't need to be here, so I'm going to delete it. And this doesn't need to be here either, so I'm going to delete this. Okay, I messed something up over there, but let's just open it again. So I'm going to open this and I'm going to go ahead and add a folder to workspace. And I'm going to add this one. I have both of them over here. Now I want to go ahead and save workspace as Cypress 101. Okay, so this time we got it right. So we have the Cypress practice and we have the Cypress real world app added to this workspace. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to open a terminal under the Cypress real world app and I'm going to say yarn install, and that's going to install whatever we cloned. This will just take some time to install. So the documentation that's provided in the Cypress website will give you a good idea on how to do that. So it's in the best practices section. If you go to best practices and click on this, it will take you to the Git repo. And over here, it shows you first yarn install and then yarn dev. And then you can get the application up and running in your local host. Just waiting over here. Okay, it's finally done. Now I'm going to do yarn dev. Okay, so after doing that, it opened up the localhost 3000 sign in. Okay, let me just sign up again. Test name. Okay. Sign up. Uh, did I say? Okay. So this is what it looks like, the real world app. Just give some random information here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then I'm gonna give an account number. I'm gonna save it. So this is what it looks like. We're gonna be using this to do some testing. This has a lot of good examples for us. It has a date picker and a lot of good stuff, buttons, login, logout. So this would be a good example for us to practice against. So while we have this, now what I'm going to do next is I'm going to go ahead and add the configuration for the Cypress Cypress.json file. So we see how to set up configurations here. I'm going to change the base URL. So let's see how to do that. So base URL, just for reference, so we have the, let me go ahead, terminal, this one, npx, Cypress, open. So we have a test runner over here. I think it's doing that because we started making some changes in the configuration file. Right over here. So it's not able to identify that. So if I just remove this for now and try again, you'll be able to see how it showed in the beginning, right? With everything over here. So I'm going to be going ahead and changing the base URL and some more things over here. So we'll be able to see exactly how changing the configuration file changes the configurations in the test runner and how it reacts immediately. So first thing I'm going to do is actually we want to ignore the test files over here. So I'm going to go ahead and let me open. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go to my Cypress folder. And then I'm going to go to Cypress integrations. I'm going to create a new folder called examples. So these are the examples that Cypress gave us. I'm going to put these two in the examples folder. Okay. So once I do that, you'll be able to see that it's already under over here, under the examples folder over here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add a base URL. Our base URL was null in the beginning. So I'm going to add it to HTTPS localhost 3000. That's the application under test that we've added from the real world app from Cypress documentation. Next, I'm going to ignore the example files that Cypress sent to us because I just want to use that as a reference. I don't really want to use that every time we run our tests because I want us to write our own tests against the real world application. So I'm going to ignore those test files. Now, for you to get an idea on what these exact keywords are, you need to check the documentation that I referred to in the beginning. That'll give you an exact idea of what are your different options and what are some things that you can do. Another thing I'm going to add is the viewport height and width. I'm going to change the viewport height to 768 for high definition. I'm going to change the viewport width to 1024. Okay, so when I make these changes now, when I try this again, you'll be able to see that no files are found in integration because we've ignored the example files, right? We've ignored this entire folder, so it won't be able to identify it. And if you go ahead and see the configuration file, you'll see that the base URL is changed, the base URL we gave over here, and we've ignored something. So we've ignored the examples over here. So that is also being shown. And we've changed the viewport height and width. That's also being reflected. So you see how immediately it reflects whatever we write in the config file in the test runner. That is so cool. So far we've downloaded Node.js, we've installed Cypress, we've installed our application under test, and we saw how the configuration file works, and we saw what the different folder structures are for and what we'll be using them moving forward for.